Your Honor, before I start, may I reserve any of my remaining time up to 5 minutes for a rebuttal? May it please the court? The defendant was supposed to be the designated driver, but the defendant decided to drive drunk. And it's because of that decision that Vanessa Sullivan is dead. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The defendant goes into Chuggy's bar. You heard 2 different eyewitnesses tell you that he was having drink after drink after drink. You were able to look at his bar tabs and see just how many drinks he really purchased that night. He was there for 11 hours. And by the end of that night, you heard 2 eyewitnesses tell you that he was acting drunk. And members of the jury, this isn't the kind of drunk that you get when you've just had a few too many. This isn't the kind of drunk that you might get at a wedding. This was falling down, stumbling, spilling his drink, unable to pass a field sobriety test, drunk. That is how drunk he was. And that's how drunk he was when he got into a car with 2 young women and he drove them home. He sped them home. Members of the jury, this is his own admission. Before he even left the bar, he intended to speed home that night. He used a radar detector and took a route that he knew would be patrolled by fewer police officers because he knew that he was going to speed. In the dark, in the pouring down rain, on a road that he knew was dangerous. And members of the jury, this was after, in just 45 minutes, he had consumed these 4 drinks. Now remember, you heard Pat Lawrence tell you that that last drink he had that night, that was a shot of grain alcohol. That was twice the normal content of a regular drink. Members of the jury, he got up here and he told you that his limit was a drink an hour. It's up to you to evaluate whether he stuck to his limits. When he had 4 drinks in the 45 minutes before he got in that car to drive, to speed home in terrible conditions. The judge just instructed you that you have 2 different charges to decide on when you go back into that jury room. You have to decide on the charge of operating a motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol. And to do that, you have to find beyond a reasonable doubt that he was under the influence of alcohol intoxication. Members of the jury, what doubt is there? 2 different eyewitnesses testified about how many drinks he had and how drunk he was acting. He was slurring his words. He was stumbling. And when he got up onto that stand, members of the jury, he lied to you. He looked you all in the eye and he told you he was fine to drive because he stuck to a drink per hour. He lied to you. Does that sound like what an innocent man would do? Lie under oath in his murder trial? What he told you, members of the jury, was that this accident derailed his life. At least he still has a life. Because the young girl that was in his car that night, she doesn't anymore. The defendant tried to tell you that he's the victim in all of this. Was the defendant reckless? Yes. Was the defendant drunk? No question. Is the defendant a victim? Not even close. The second charge you have to decide on today, members of the jury, is murder. The reason that the state is pursuing charges of murder is because of this second thing you have to decide right here. That this conduct he engaged in was under circumstances manifesting an extreme indifference to human life. So what does that mean? That means that this case goes above and beyond a typical case of drunk driving. So let's take a look at the risks that the defendant decided to take that night, and you can decide whether they were substantial, whether they were justifiable. Every single drink he had that night, members of the jury, was another risk that he took, especially when he knew that he was going to be driving that night. He tried to say anything he could to get around admitting it, but he couldn't deny it. He found out that he was supposed to be the designated driver, and then, members of the jury, do you know what he did? He ordered another drink. That was the substantial, unjustifiable risk that he took. And ladies and gentlemen, he got up here today and he tried to justify his actions that night. He tried to tell you that because he wanted to get Vanessa Sullivan home in time for curfew, that makes it okay. How dare he? How dare he get up here and tell you that because he didn't want someone's mom to be mad at him, all of the risks that he took that night, his callous, cold, inhuman disregard for human life was justified. Don't let him get away with that. Find him guilty of driving under the influence of alcohol and of murder.